Building and deploying software should be an automated process. By automating our builds, we reduce bugs by creating a repeatable process that is predictable. In the past, I've shown you how to set up such a process in Azure DevOps. Today, I'm excited to share with you a new system for building, testing, and publishing your software that's able to work across almost any deployment system in the same way. Cake is a build system that you create right alongside your project. You check it into source control and you manage it just like your source code. Then you can take that file and run it on Azure DevOps, Jenkins, TeamCity, GitHub Actions, or your build system of choice. The build will be executed the same way across all of those platforms. This allows you to be less tied to a particular build system, plus it allows you to design your build process centrally and version it. In this video, I'm going to show you how easy it is to get started with Cake. Now, if this is the first video you've watched of mine. My name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. I provide videos twice a week on YouTube to help you grow as a developer. I also have a full set of training courses on IamTimCorey.com. I'd encourage you to check out all the resources that I have to offer. In this video, as with most of my videos, I'm going to create some source code. If you'd like a copy of my code, use the link in the description to get it. Let's get started by opening up Visual Studio. Now, I already have some pre-built code, but don't worry, I haven't done anything crazy with my code. I'm going to walk you through all the changes that I've done to the templates. So to start off with, we have the My Web app. This is a ASP.NET Core MVC project. Why MVC? Because it doesn't really matter. I just needed some project to create. I figured, hey, I don't do a whole lot of MVC stuff, so let's create one. Now, it does not matter what project type I chose. To be clear, what I'm going to do today will work the same way with WinForms, with WPF, console applications, Blazor server, Blazor WebAssembly. It doesn't matter. The project type is not what determines whether or not this is going to work. Okay, this will work with all of them. So I just chose MVC kind of at random, but this gives us at least a starting point. Now, I did add a dependency. Oh, I did not actually. My library is not even a dependency in here. So let's add that. I'm going to add a reference here just so we have that dependency in my web app on my library. Does it use it? No. Obviously, as you see, it wasn't even referenced. In fact, this template is the starter template. There's no changes besides that reference I just added. Otherwise, it's just a basic MVC template. I didn't change a thing. The My Library is a .NET Core 5. I'm sorry, .NET 5. Nope. It's a .NET Core 3.1 project, and this is a .NET 5, I believe. This is .NET 5. In fact, let's go ahead and change this library to use .NET 5 as well. By default, it came out as 3.1. There we go. .NET 5 now, class library, and our tests, we should also make sure that is targeting .NET 5. Okay, so our class library has one class called calculator, and in there it has really complex code. It has the add method and it has the subtract method. All right, so the add method takes in two doubles and it just adds them together and returns them. And that returns as a double. Subtract, x minus y, returns that value. Okay, I do have tests. So the tests test this calculator. I just wanted to have some kind of unit testing in place so that we can run those tests in our build system. And these tests are add should work, and it just does 4 addition tests. And then we have subtract should work, and it does 4 subtraction tests. This is, by the way, XUnit. You can use NUnit, you can use MS test, doesn't matter. I just chose XUnit because that's my preference. But that's it. That's all we have for our system. So really, I didn't want this to be focused on the code. I want to be as clean as possible. This is not about the code itself. It's about the build system. Now let's just make sure that with those changes that occurred, that all of my tests are going to run. Build just succeeded. Now it's running my tests, and all 8 tests pass. So I have 4 addition tests and 4 subtraction tests. They all pass. So we're good to go. So that's the source code. That's everything I set up. And it's a pretty basic class library, MVC app, and test app. Just enough to get us something to build. Now, if you're not familiar with what a build system does, or what we're talking about when I say build and publish or prepare, is the build process is going to build up at least the web app. And it's going to compile the whole thing. It's going to restore all Nuget packages. It's going to do a build, so a build solution. And then after that, what it's going to do is going to run the tests, and then it's going to publish at least the MVC project. So this is equivalent of going right-click, publish, and then walking through the folder process where we say, okay, here's where we're going to publish it to, how we're going to publish it, and so on. That's the process. Now, from there, what you would do is you would take those published files and you'd put them directly into IIS on your server, or you would put them, you'd upload them into an Azure web app or something similar. The cake process is the continuous integration portion, CI of CI/CD. It's not about deploying. So we're not actually going to deploy to Azure or to a web server of some kind. We're just going to prepare our code to be published. That's where your build process would pick up from there, your deployment process. It would take the files that Cake creates and just publish them. That's all it's going to have to do. So let's see this process in action. And I want to just point out, if you've been following along with the Timco Retail Manager series, if not, I would encourage you to check that series out. There's a very long-running series I have on building a real-world application. And right now we are in the process of adding Blazor WebAssembly and doing some pretty cool things with authentication, APIs, and all the rest. But we have a Azure DevOps process for our continuous integration and deployment. I want to bring it up real quick. This is not a Timco video, but I want to point out the complexities of what a build system is and how it works. I thought this would be a good example. Ignore the ones that are crossed out. That's just us that need to clean something up. But this is our continuous integration build, where we start by using .NET Core 5, and we do a package restore, and then we do a publish, and then we grab just the API portion. So we're doing a publish, we grab just the API artifacts, then we delete those files, then we do a new publish of our SQL project, and we zip that up, and we delete those files. Then we do some replacement of tokens, we do a build process for our WPF project, then we publish that or zip it up into a folder, we delete those, we do some command line scripts, and then we do another publish. So all of that work is about the build process. All of this, except for the actual, we call it publish here, but really what it's doing is taking the outputted files from the publish process and zipping them up. Everything except for those steps right there, so all the rest of these steps will be replaced by Cake. So you'll have 2 tasks actually. One that says restore my tools, and the second one says build Cake. And that process will go to our Cake file, and it's going to run all these tasks that we're doing in here, but we're going to do it right from source code. So I'm going to show you how to do basically all these processes inside of Cake. Now we're not going to use the Timco code. We may in Timco switch over to Cake, because now that Cake is version 1.0, and that's the reason I'm covering it now is because it just launched the 1.0 version. Now that it's 1.0, I think maybe that might be a good thing to kind of upgrade our systems in Timco. We'll talk about it. You can leave some comments down below or under the Timco series to tell me what you think. But with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up, let's minimize this here and bring up, okay, this is Visual Studio Code. This is free. So if you've never used the VS Code before, this is a free editor. It's a text editor that Microsoft gives away, and it's the most popular web editor on the planet. Okay, it's free, it works great, and what we're going to do with this is we're going to build. This is our cake demo solution, and then you notice in here there's our class library. I'm not sure why it's yelling at us about this. There's a problem in the file. Who cares? That's the OBJ folder. Don't care. But this is our CS project. There's our .NET 5 project for class library. And then we have our test project, and there's our tests right there. This is all the same code. Okay, it's pointing at the same folder. I just opened it up in VS Code. And the reason I did that is because we're going to work with a cake file at the solution level. And it's easier to do it in here, but I'm going to still show you how to do it in Visual Studio itself. And so in Visual Studio, we'll show you how to do this, but it's easier to do in VS Code. VS Code is a text editor. It's a little more friendly with working with files. We're just opening a folder here. We're not opening a solution. The other thing is that there is a very nice plugin for Cake for Visual Studio Code that I want to use. It's going to do some syntax highlighting and some debugging and allow us to step into our Cake build code easier. In Visual Studio, it's pretty much just a text file, which means it's not nearly as easy to work with. So we're going to use VS Code. It also has the integrated terminal. So if you hit Control tilde, it brings up the terminal, which is a PowerShell terminal by default for me. You can create other shells if you want, but we're going to do some PowerShell commands on this as well. So I like to have all of this in one spot, and VS Code is perfect for that. Now, to begin with, let's talk about that add-in. So if you go to your extensions, notice I have installed the Cake extension. And let's get rid of the terminal. Go away. There we go. So this is the Cake extension, and it talks you through. Just install it. I've already installed it, but this walks you through some of the basic commands you can do and how to do them, and the snippets you can do. There's a lot of stuff you can learn in here to do. I haven't memorized it all. For example, there's it looks like a snippet for just just task, which that's kind of convenient. I haven't used that before, but some really cool stuff in here. Okay, so check it all out. There's a lot of good stuff in here. This extension is pretty awesome, and it's up to date with Cake itself. So let's get started with Cake in our solution. So I'm at the root of a solution for the Cake demo project. So cakedemo.sln is right here. I'm going to say let's create a new, actually before I do this, I'm going to open up the terminal again. I'm going to run two commands. I'm going to walk you through what these commands are. The first one is .NET space new space tool dash manifest. And what that's going to do is, this is a .NET command. It's not a Cake command. Notice it added this .config folder, which does show up. It's really nice that it shows up in VS Code. And this, inside of .config folder, it added a .NET-tools.json file. So what this file is it's going to bring with our solution the list of tools that we have to build this solution. So for example, if you need a certain version of EF Core, then you could say in here, I need this version, these tools. In our case, we have one tool we want to bring with us, and that is the Cake tool. So down here in our command limit window, notice there's nothing in here yet. I'm going to say .NET space tool space install space cake.tool. Now, I'm working on the command prompt inside a terminal right here, but if you don't have VS Code, you don't have to worry about this. You can just go to the command prompt or open up PowerShell, doesn't matter which, and make sure you go to your right path, the path of your solution, and then just run these same commands. This is just kind of integrated. It's really nice to have this in with my, my solution. So .NET tool install cake.tool. This is going to install it into our solution. You do this once per repository, once per solution. Notice now under tools in our .NET tools, it says, hey, I'm dependent on cake.tool version 1.0.0, and the command is .NET-cake. So what this is saying to anybody that runs this project, it says I'm dependent on the cake tool, but not just the cake tool. I'm dependent on the version 1.0.0 of the cake tool. That means if tomorrow they come out with cake 2.0 and have massive breaking changes, you are still protected. You see, you don't want a build system to start breaking over time based upon changes external to your project. So if you don't change anything in your code, but later on it doesn't work, that'd be a problem, right? Well, what this does is it locks you in to say, I'm using the 1.0.0 version of cake. And from now until eternity, I want you to use 1.0.0. And it will do that. Now, obviously, as you go forward, there's probably going to be some improvements to cake that you're going to want to take advantage of. But that's on you. That's on your time scale. If you decide to leave it at 1.0.0 because it works, cool. Leave it right there. There's no reason to change if it works. So this protects you against potentially breaking changes in newer versions of cake. It's up to you to test newer versions and say, yep, that one works and it's got some bug fixes that I need. Then go ahead and change this version to the newer version. So we run this once per repository, once per source code set, just once. You have to keep running it every time you open up solutions or anything like that. It's done once and it's done. So now we have our project file, our .NET tools.json file. We can come back down here. Let's go back to the solution just so we're in the right spot. And now, let's close this out too. I'm going to create a new file. So up here, click new. I'm going to call it build.cake. The important part is the .cake, but the convention is build.cake. Now we have a cake file. Notice already it's got the red cake with the wrench on it as a symbol. So you already know that the cake add-in to Visual Studio Code has picked that up and recognized it as a cake folder or file. Okay, so this is going to be this file right here will be our entire build script. This is going to be everything we do to build this project and publish it. So let's start off with some declarations. And these declarations, this code we're going to write in here looks exactly like C#. So it's very familiar. Var target equals argument. Let's call it target, if I can spell. Target, and we're going to say that let's go with build. To start off with, what this line right here is this line that says, hey, I want you to create an argument called target. And what that target says is it creates an entry point into our build script. It says, here's the place to start. In our case, we're saying start at the build step. I'll show you steps in just a minute. But this setup will allow us down near the end to say run target. Okay, now this line is kind of like in a console application, you have your static void main. That's the place you start. Well, this is kind of that static void main. This is the one method we're going to run that says, I want you to execute something. What do you execute? The target. Well, we set that up as the target is the build step. So this is saying execute the build step, which you don't have yet. Let's go ahead and create that. So task build. There we go. There's our build step. So now this is essentially a complete cake file. Now it does nothing. So don't get too excited yet. But this is the start of our build system. There's more to doing a build than just running build, because we have to restore our Nuget packages, right? So let's do this. We're going to say task, and let's call this restore for restoring our Nuget packages. Cool. But there's an order here because we need to do a build after we have restored our Nuget packages. Otherwise, if we have any Nuget packages in our project, which we do, then we can't do a build because those Nuget packages haven't been restored. So we can't run this step until you run this step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, take the semicolon off, go to the next line, tab in once, and say is dependent on restore. Semicolon. So now I've created a hierarchy. I've said, okay, you want to run build. That's your target, right? But build is dependent on the restore having been run. Therefore, it's going to run restore first and then build. Now, again, these don't do anything yet. So let's put some code in here that actually does something, right? So let's start with restore. Now tab in once and say does. This is where the magic happens. That's where work gets done. So I'm going to create we'll say a lambda expression and some curly braces, semicolon at the end, and say does. So does, open paren, and then open close paren. There's no parameters here. Then say have your arrow, curly braces, and then your close paren and your semicolon. So inside here is the actual work. .NET Core restore. Now we have to give it a folder path. So we're going to do a .NET restore. How do I know about this command right here? Well, it's in the documentation. I wish IntelliSense worked for this. It doesn't. I'm not sure if it's coming in this plugin for Cake or not, but it will after you've created a file. It'll work in the file, but just based upon whatever verbs you've created. So this is in the documentation for Cake. That's at cakebuild.org. So this right here does a .NET restore. And that's the .NET space restore on your solution or on your project, whatever you want to call it. So we need something to pass in here. We needed some kind of parameter to say, well, we want to run it on the solution, right? So instead of putting it hard coding it here, I'm going to come to the top and say var solution or solution folder equals, and we'll say /, which means this current directory, because Cake is in the same directory as our solution. Therefore, it's going to find the solution in this directory. We could specify the full name, but by doing this, it allows us to keep our file a little more generic. Because here's the cool thing. You're going to be able to copy and paste this file pretty much the same to all your other projects, and it will work the same way. We'll keep all the changeable stuff at the very top, and the rest of the stuff is going to be pretty much boilerplate unless you do your builds differently. But for the most part, it's going to be the same stuff. So solution folder, and then down here, we'll say restore the solution folder. So now the restore is going to restore the solution folder, and then it's going to build the system, which build's not doing anything yet. Let's make it do something. So after is dependent on restore, take off that semicolon, go to the next line, and say does. Same syntax. And then in here, we're going to say .NET Core, not restore, build. But you see the syntax? It's pretty much the same syntax. It's just instead of restore, it's build. Guess what? There's also things like clean and other ones. But .NET Core build, pass in the solution folder, and say, new .NET Core build settings. And then on a new line, we'll put our open and close curly braces and say no restore equals true. And we need configuration. So configuration equals configuration, which I don't have that yet. Let's go ahead and add that up top. So up top, after the target, I'm going to create a new var and say configuration equals argument. This is also documented in the documentation. Argument configuration release. So this is where we say, are you in debug mode or release mode? So we want to be in release mode all the time. I could hard code that because, quite frankly, I never want it to change from release mode. I don't want to deploy debug mode code. But this way, we have it up top, and we can, if we ever had an occasion to say, I actually want debug, then go ahead and just change it right there. It'll change everywhere. So let's review what I did here. I said do a .NET Core build, similar to the .NET Core restore and pass in the solution. But I also wanted to have changes to the defaults. So I said, hey, give me a new .NET Core build settings, which is a C# class. And then I said, here's the things I want to change. And so I changed the no restore property to be true. What that does is it says when you do a build, don't also do a restore, because I've already done that for you right up here. There's no reason to do it again. This allows you to control when things get done. So with no restore set to true, now we won't have a double restore. Also, the configuration is being set to release mode, making sure that we're doing everything in release mode. So I'm going to do a build of our solution, no restore, and using the release mode configuration. Cool. But we're not done yet because I've got some unit tests. And after I do a build, I want to make sure I test those or run those tests. So task test dot is dependent on build. So you can't run unit tests until you've done a build. And then our does. Inside here, I'm going to say .NET Core. You see how our IntelliSense is kind of filling up because of all the ones we've used, and the pattern, .NET Core in front of all of them. Test. So I pass in my solution folder. It's going to find any test inside my solution. And then new .NET Core test settings. Again, follows the same naming convention of .NET Core test with settings at the end. And in here, no restore equals true. Configuration equals configuration. And also no build equals true. You've already done the build. Again, we're controlling the narrative, controlling when things happen. We don't want our test to rebuild our solution because we just built it. So now we have, let's put our semicolons in here before I forget them. Now we have our test system. And you may say, well, Tim, the target is the build. And you're right. If we run this as it is, we're never going to run a test because the target is build. So let's change that to test. I'm going to show you how to jump in and out of all these different ones. But let's just stop right there and we'll pull up our console. Let's clear the screen here. And I am going to do a command. Let's pull the whole thing up and say .NET cake. This command is going to look for the cake file in the directory where we're at. And it's going to run this using the default settings. Now, what are the default settings? Well, we said run target, and that target is test. So enter. As long as I haven't typed anything wrong, it will run the restore. It'll run the build. Build succeeded. Then it runs the tests. The tests passed. Notice we have 8 passed tests, 0 skipped, and 0 failed. Duration 3 milliseconds. There's our whole process. It took 7 seconds, 7.5 seconds to build our application. We have a restore, we have a build, we have a test. Total, there you go. We have just done a complete build of our software. But I'm not done yet because that's just a build. And that's the same thing you could do with doing build in Visual Studio and then saying run my tests. So let's get this set up a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a publish as well. Let's set up a output folder. So var output folder equals, let's say /artifacts. Now, this is going to say at the root, where we're at right now, I want you to put it in the artifacts folder. There is no artifacts folder here. Don't worry, it's going to create that folder for us. So let's now create a publish task. So after test, because it's going to be logically after test, you don't have to put these in this order. You can jumble them up if you want, but I think it makes sense to put them roughly in the order that we called. So task publish. I'm going to say is dependent on test. So if test doesn't work right, we're going to show you how to make that change so it fails and then see that it doesn't even run the publish. We're going to do it in a minute, but it's going to make sure that it builds in this order. So it's going to do restore, build, test, publish. Okay, does so our syntax, let's put the semicolon in before I forget it, because I will forget it otherwise. And we're going to say .NET Core, surprised, publish. Solution folder, new .NET Core publish settings. And here, let's put our semicolon again before I forget it. And I'm going to say no restore equals true. Configuration equals configuration. No build equals true. And finally, output directory equals output folder. Okay, so there's our publish command. It's going to put all of our files that we've published for our solution into the artifacts directory, which doesn't exist yet. So let's make sure we're running this. I'm going to show you how to run these tasks without changing this in a minute. But for now, we're going to make sure that this is the default task. Let's save this. Let's bring up our terminal again. And let's clear the screen. And we're going to say .NET Cake again. And I typed something wrong. Semicolon expected. Output director as well. Of course. Output directory. And it's also expecting a semicolon on line 4. Read your error messages, okay? Don't just say, I've got an error, it's not working. You need to read your error messages. I have 2 errors right here. One says semicolon expected. That's like a hit me over the head, duh, Tim moment. But it tells me line 4, character number 33. All right? So that tells you right here, this line, I never read the characters and go, okay, that looks like 33. But semicolon expected, that's pretty easy to see. That should be the end. And then down here, does not contain a definition for output director. Yeah, because I spelled it wrong. It happens a lot. So that's why I like IntelliSense a lot. Okay, let's try this again. .NET Cake. And I have another syntax error. Output directory. Oh my goodness, it's output. Output directory. Let's try it one last time. Well, maybe not the last time, but here we go. Restore, build, test, publish. See, now I have over here an artifacts folder. That whole process took less than 5 seconds. And I have an artifacts folder with all of my files that I need to deploy this to a web server. So I can just copy these files and deploy them to a web server. Azure Web Apps, or intra-server hosting, or your IaaS of choice, whatever. So now we have a working build process. Now, there's one thing that's kind of a problem here, though, and that is, what happens if we run this again? Well, we're going to get overwriting these files. And what if there's files that don't get overwritten because they're no longer added to the project? Maybe we don't have an app settings.development.json we want to have here anymore. So when we overwrite it, that old one will still be there. That could be a real problem because it might have settings in there, and maybe for some reason we're running off the development version. That can be a major problem. So we want to get rid of these files before we do the build. So let's do this. Let's add another task into our process. Let's close this down. I'm going to add it at the top. I'm going to say task clean. This is our cleanup task. And it's not going to depend on anything. Does clean directory. And this is a built-in system. Clean directory. We're going to say solution folder. Nope, not solution folder. I'm sorry, output folder. What this, and semicolon at the end, don't forget that, Tim. What this is going to do is it's going to delete everything in the artifacts folder. Clean it out. All right. Now, this is not in the process yet. This is not set up yet. Well, what we can do is we can put this somewhere in the process. Now, we could say, hey, don't do a restore until you've done a clean, but we don't have to. In fact, we could say, you know what? That's not really needed until down here, because we don't need to clean it up until we do a publish. But maybe say, you know what, it's probably cleanest we do it before the build. Just in case something goes wrong in the build process, we'll have at least cleaned it up so we can have that directory cleaned. So let's do it right here. So I can say is dependent on clean. Now, notice I have two is dependent ons. So when it comes to doing a build process, we're going to say, hey, we need to do both of these processes before we do this build process. And there is not an order necessary. So it's not like we have to do one versus the other first. So let's save this and let's run this again. So now we have our artifacts folder that's full. Let's bring up our console. I'm not going to expand it this time. I'm going to keep the artifacts folder open. I'm going to do a clear screen and do a .NET Cake again. As long as I haven't mistyped anything. Notice the clean, now that artifacts folder is empty. Now the publish process is going to fill it right back up. So now we're doing a clean as part of our process. We're making sure we don't have any leftover stuff from the last time we ran this process. But what if I was working with this and say, you know what, I just want to get this directory clean. I don't want to have anything in this directory, but I don't want to delete it manually. No problem. You can come here and say, see this run task? This is something that is, it's part of the plugin for VS Code. And one of the reasons why I love using the plugin and using VS Code, I can just click run task. And notice it opened a Cake terminal and it ran just that task. Now, if it depended on anything, it'd run those too. But if we scroll up here, if you can read this, it says .net-cake.exe. There is the cake file to execute. And then it says --target is clean. Notice up here we have target is publish. That's our default. Well, this --target equals, we can give it a different target than the normal. So we can say .net space cake --target equals restore. We can do that as our step to run. So you don't have to just change this publish. You can either click this button here, or you can do the command line and type out which version or which target you want to have to execute. Now, I told you that we're going to mess with our tests. So let's go to the test folder. Let's get rid of our terminal. And in these tests, we've got add and subtract. But what if we change this 1 + 2 = 3 to 1 + 2 = 4? Or you know what? Yeah, 1 + 2 = 4, which we know isn't right. So let's save that. Let's come back to our terminal. Let's expand it this time, and we'll do, actually this is the cake version. Let's close it out. There's our PowerShell version. I'm going to do a clear screen, and I'm going to run .NET Cake. We have a failing test in this process. So it runs, does the build, we're going to hit the tests, and our build process failed. And it fails, and it says add should work, 1, 2, expected is 4, and the error expected for actual is 3. There's our stack trace for us. We have 1 failed test, we have 7 passed tests, and 0 skipped tests. So that's exactly what we want to have happen. We failed the build because of the fact that our tests failed. Therefore, there's no reason to go any further. Notice the artifacts folder is empty. There's nothing in here because we didn't get to the publish step because we have a failing test. Therefore, we didn't go to publish. So that just shows you that by failing a test, you fail the build like you want to have happen. So let's change that back to 3. Let's save this, close this out, and we're going to do the clear screen again and do our .NET Cake. We'll expand it out just to see it does go back to working this time. There we go. There's our publish. And now we have artifacts in our folder. So that's really all there is to getting started with Cake. Cake is a really simple way to get started. Notice that all this code right here, as long as you intend to do the normal build process, by normal I mean typical, where you clean out your folder or folders, where you do a restore, a build, test, publish process, you can just copy this and change just these 4 lines if you need to. If you have a standard output folder you always use for your files, then really, I don't see the need to change any of these. You can just copy this whole build.cake file and check it into every one of your projects. And speaking of checking it in, when you're using source control, you will make sure that build.cake is included, as is the .net-tools.json file. Both of those need to be in source control. Neither one of them will have any kind of sensitive information, but both of those need to be included in source control. So with that in place, we can take this file and run it on VS Code, or I'm sorry, in Azure DevOps or in Jenkins, TeamCity, whatever. To run it on any of those platforms, you've got 2 commands to do. One, .NET tool restore, .NET space tool space restore. That's going to restore whatever tools we have in .NET tools.json, which would be the 1.0 version of .NET Cake. So .NET tool restore is the first line, and the second line or the second command to run is .NET Cake. That's it. That's all you gotta do, and now this whole process will run. The result will be, in our case, a folder called artifacts that has all of our published code. Now, if you want to say, you know what, I don't want to publish just my my whole project. Maybe I want to publish that library separately too. Maybe create a Nuget package out of it. Let's just publish it as a DLL for now. No problem. What you do is you just do these same tasks. For example, the only thing we need to do really is have a publish that would publish just the CS project. So instead of going to the solution folder, I would have it dial into the my library and look for the CS proj file, which is by default, it's going to be find. So I would say, you know what? Var my library folder equals /my library. And then I'd have another publish process. So I'd actually copy this whole thing. Oops. I would paste, I would say publish library. It still depends on test, but instead of solution folder, I would say the my library folder. Do all the same processes. I would change the output folder as well. So var my library output folder equals, and I would say my library artifacts. And I need to put a semicolon up there as well. I don't know why I forget those. So my library output folder. And now I can say the output directory is my library output folder. But then which one do I start? Do I start the publish library or do I start the publish? Because up here we're running publish. Well, I would probably create a new task, execute build, and say is dependent on publish, is dependent on publish library, and execute that one instead. Doesn't do anything except make sure we have both of those run. Okay, now we should probably clean up that directory too, right? So up here in the clean, we'd say clean directory, and we'd say the my library output folder. Semicolon at the end. Save all that. Now what I'm doing is I'm building the whole thing and putting the deployed, what turns out to be a website, in the artifacts folder. But I have a separate folder called my library artifacts that will have just my DLL in it. Let's go ahead and execute this. Let's maximize, clear the screen, .NET cake. See if I forgot any semicolons again. Okay, we've got our new folder, which is empty, but now it's filled. So now all those processes executed, and we have a my library artifacts, which has our mylibrary.dll, as well as the PDB file and the mylibrary.deps.json file. So that folder, as well as our artifacts folder, which just happens to also have the mylibrary.dll because our web project depends on that library. So you can do that. You can have multiple outputs. And for the Timco Retail Manager series, we probably have 4 of those folders. We have, or 3. We have one for the API, one for the WPF project, and one for the database project as well. So, and then actually one for the Blazor project. So we have 4. So that's, that's perfectly normal. And to do that, we just add a little more complexity up here, but you can do more than one clean and have more than one publish. That's it. That's all you have to do in order to get a little more complex of a build system going. You can figure out how to make it work for your environment. There's more options in how to make this work. Let's go back to our window here and go to cakebuild.org. Whoops. I'm sorry, not .org, .net. Cakebuild.net. Not sure why I was going to org. There we go. There is Cake. Notice Cake 1.0.0 is now available as of recording this video. So this is going to walk you all through how to use Cake. There is some confusing parts in documentation. So that's why I did this video to kind of clarify some of those things for getting started. But once you know, hey, this is what I want to do, you can figure out how to, go beyond getting started and get into things like integrations, how to integrate it, and then extending Cake. There's a whole bunch of add-ins. All right. So under, I believe it's the API, you will find a whole bunch of things in here for pretty much everything. AWS, if you want, EC2 and Azure DevOps and all the rest. And some of those are going to be plugins or add-ins that are third party. But it will tell you that. So if you want to do something as SQL, which I'll need to do for the Timco Retail Manager series, well, then you can go in here under probably SQL packages. And it's going to say, hey, this is part of a third-party extension that's not supported by Cake. For more about it, see cake.sql package. And it says, here's how to get this add-in, packages.config, this is what you're going to need. And then here's all the things you can do. Drift report, export, extract, import, publish, and so on. So this is going to set you all up for success with the SQL package. There's a lot of different things out there for working with Cake. There's a lot of different plugins for it. If you want to go right to the source code, you can go right to source, and there you go. There's Cake. Inside here, you can look at all the different integrations, how it works, anything's going on. You can even contribute and become a sponsor. I would encourage, if you are using it in production, you're using it for some of your systems, go ahead and become a sponsor. Pay for what you're using, okay? It's because of even little contributions that open source projects can continue. It's not about greed. It's about the fact that by you giving something for their free time, the time they gave you for free, then they are able to eat. They're able to have a roof over their head. They're able to not do consulting or other work that's paid and instead contribute more to the open source community. So I would definitely encourage you to become a backer if you use it and find it valuable. All right. So that's the Cake project. There's a lot you can do here, but we're not done yet. Let's minimize this. I did want to come back to Visual Studio. You come back to Visual Studio and nothing seems to have changed. In fact, if we do a rebuild here, there's nothing different. In fact, there's no Cake file in this project at all. So how do we get around this? How do we find that Cake file? Well, if you right click on a solution and say add existing item, find that Cake file, it's going to add a solution items file, and then it adds the build.cake. Notice there's no IntelliSense here. There's no, it's just a text file. It doesn't know what Cake is. There is, if you go under extensions, there is a Cake extension that's in 0.3 release, and I didn't find it very helpful. So I didn't keep it installed. But this at least puts that Cake file in your directory. We still need to add another existing item, and that is under config. We need to add that .NET Tools JSON into our project and make sure that that's at least got the JSON IntelliSense or JSON coloring. But make sure both of these are in your solution and more importantly in your source control so that you can version them and make sure that when you send this code to a build server that it can run that .NET Tool restore and then run .NET Cake effectively. So that's the .NET Cake system. I really love this system. I love the fact that you can build this one file and it does all your build system work. And then it doesn't matter what type of build system you have, whether it's Azure DevOps or Jenkins or so on. You can just take this file and it runs there. And it does it the same way as it does on your computer. You can run this locally, make sure it works, and then you just say, hey, use this file to do my build process all the way up through publish. And that's, for me, that's really comforting because I can't count the number of times where I have had a build on Azure DevOps that first of all takes a while because I use the free build server, or the build system. And so it takes a while to get started, and it runs and it fails. And it runs and it fails. In fact, one of the more recent Timco videos, we had to work through a build system that's failing. And I went through 3 or 4 times where it failed. And every time it fails, you have to at least requeue a build, if not recommit code. So that's frustrating. Doing it locally, I have the full power of my computer. I don't have to wait for any kind of transfer. I don't have to wait for the build system to be ready for me. It just works locally, and I can test it all very, very quickly. I can get it working, and then I can put it into Azure DevOps. And tomorrow, if I decide, you know what, we want to move away from Azure DevOps and go towards GitHub Actions, I can take that same file and run it on GitHub Action, and it will work the same way as it did in Azure DevOps. Is that something I do all the time? No. But when I do, it's going to be awesome because it's so much easier. And even if I don't ever do that, the fact that I can test it locally, commit it to source control, and run it the same way on the server as it runs on my machine is invaluable. And then if it stops working at some point, you can go to source control and say, do a git blame on this file. Who's to blame for breaking this? What changed? And that is a really powerful tool for debugging. So there's just a lot to like about cake. And yes, I know there's a lot to like about the food cake as well. And if you're a little hungry after this episode, I understand because I am too. But and leave your best, jokes down below. The cake is not a lie. Just saying. So with that being said, I hope that you at least give it a shot, try it out, see how it works for you, and maybe try putting it in a project or two and see how you like it. All right? Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, if you have any comments or thoughts about cake, leave them down in the comment section below. I just want to point out that the reason I did this video and the reason I did it at this time is because of a comment from one of you who said, hey, you need to check out cake. You need to check out cake. And I had seen cake before, but it wasn't in version 1 yet. And so I said, I'll wait. And now it's version 1. So because of feedback from my viewers, you're getting this demo, okay? So leave your comments. I'm not gonna do every suggestion you say, or not in the order you say, or as quickly as this one, but just know that I do listen to feedback. I do hear you, and I do want to give you what you want and need, okay? So thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.